Democrats really have two missions in terms of our agenda on behalf of everyday Americans. One is to lift up the middle class, those who aspire to be part of the middle class, low-income families, working families, all across the United States of America. We've taken some incredibly important steps in that regard, including most recently with the rollout of the child tax credit, which is going to be transformative in terms of the help and assistance that it will provide to tens of millions of American families to help make ends meet. Child tax credit has already made a difference based on the payments that have gone out to everyday Americans, which will help them pay for food and rent and housing and clothing and diapers and medicine and health care. Because the American people have said to us over the last several years that they are struggling. Prior to the pandemic, we know that approximately half of the American people reported that they could not afford a sudden, unexpected $400 expense. Child tax credit payments will make a big difference in that regard for everyday Americans. Our second mission, of course, is to defend our democracy from the increasing attacks and efforts at voter suppression that are occurring all across the land. And in that regard, we were honored to hear from several members of the Texas House delegation about their efforts to lift up democracy in the great state of Texas, to prevent voter suppression bills from ever seeing the light of day. And of course, they encourage us here in the Capitol to do our part to make sure that voter protection and democracy reform measures like For the People Act, H.R. 1, and John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Empowerment Act, which will be H.R. 4, make it over the finish line. And we were pleased to hear from them, and we look forward to doing what we need to do to protect and defend our democracy. It's now my honor to yield to the Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguilar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, one of the important topics that we discussed in there was the expanded child tax credit. And we know members were around the country over the past few weeks highlighting the fact that millions of hardworking families received that tax benefit last week. So members have been encouraged, as the chairman and I have done events in our districts, members have been encouraged to continue to talk about how we are lifting up everyday Americans with that child tax credit. I was also pleased to hear from Chair DeLauro earlier this morning as well. She highlighted the appropriations bills that we got out of committee, all 12 bills to strengthen our national security, to invest in cyber infrastructure, to invest in infrastructure, to invest in our communities. We look forward to those bills coming before us. And it's a reflection of our dollars, those appropriations bills. And so Chair DeLauro made the case for our colleagues to support these bills to ensure that we can do everything we can to help our communities. With that, the chairman will answer all your difficult questions.
The bill out of the Appropriations Committee does not have a high deviation from where we've been on that issue for about 40 years. So tell us what shifted in the caucus on that issue, where there was almost a time between two sides on the highs and lows. And if you're going to hear it from progressives and pro-choice lawmakers, if it is eventually stripped down, you can just keep the government open under control, or maybe you don't have one.
Well, the Appropriations Committee has worked its will. I support what has been done. with respect to the Hyde Amendment. And I expect that those bills, each and every one of them, when they eventually reach the floor of the House of Representatives, will have robust support with the House Democratic Caucus. In terms of the particulars of how we arrived at that particular place, the bill is not before the full Congress yet, and so I think we should direct that question for a more precise answer to Chairwoman Wilson.
But you know where your caucus is, and obviously there's a much more pro-choice wing of your caucus now than when you had, 40, 50 blue dogs.
Reproductive freedom is under assault across the country. It's the right thing to do, in my view, to take the step that has been taken with respect to stripping out the Hyde Amendment. We'll see what happens on the floor of the House and eventually when we conference with the Senate.
Want to hear your thoughts on the first hearing of the Select Committee to investigate January 6th, as well as thoughts on working with your Republican colleagues and what you hope to accomplish.
Well, it's my hope, it's our hope that the Select Committee, on which Vice Chair Aguilar sits, so I'll yield to him, will seek the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and discover for the American people and present in a clear, comprehensive, and compelling fashion what happened on January 6th, that fateful day, why it happened, and how do we prevent a violent insurrection and attack on the Capitol, the Congress, the Constitution, and the country from ever happening again. In terms of the workings of the committee, we have a resident expert here, Vice Chair Aguilar, and so I defer to him.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is going to be a very thoughtful exercise, and we wanted the first hearing to be from those folks directly affected, those Capitol Police officers and Metro Police officers who put their life on the line. We've heard from many of them. Many have shared their stories in the press as well. But in order to understand the gravity, to get to what the chairman mentioned, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, we have to first start with their stories. We have to hear from them on how they have been impacted. And so that's what the first hearing was about. As Chairman Thompson said, would be our first hearing. When we first had a member home, we're pleased that we're now fully constituted with 13 members. And we expect the seriousness of the topic to carry our efforts, and we're going to be guided by the resolution that we passed that encourages us to tell the entire story of how we got here, as well as what happened on January 6th.
I would just add, hundreds of Capitol Police officers were violently assaulted on January 6th. Republican members of the House claim to back the blue. They'll have an opportunity at the first hearing to keep it real and to demonstrate that those words are not just rhetorical, but they really plan to support the Capitol Police officers who defended our democracy at great personal cost to themselves on January 6th.
What sort of changes are House Democrats looking to make to the $3.5 trillion Senate budget outline that contains most of Biden's agenda? Pelosi talked about making tweaks or other adjustments. What's your sense of what those might be?
Well, we're still in the process of evaluating the outline, which does not contain detail and legislative text. We think this is an important step in the right direction on behalf of everyday Americans as it relates to bringing to life the President Biden Build Back Better agenda in the form of elements of the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. But I would defer consideration of what changes we might contemplate or think is necessary until we have a real opportunity to review the fullness of the tentative agreement that has been reached.
Congressman Aguilar, 3 out of 5 of Leader McCarthy's picks for the Select Committee did not vote to certify the election results. Do you think Speaker Pelosi should reject those members?
We're going to accept that everyone in that room will be guided by seeking the truth of what happened. That's my presumption. until I'm proven otherwise. So while I don't agree with some of the votes that my colleagues have taken with respect to that, we're going to ensure that this is a nonpartisan exercise in seeking the truth. And that you will see that from this first hearing. You will continue to see that with our questions, with the staff, and that will be the guiding theme throughout what carries us. And so we're pleased that we're fully constituted, and we're pleased to get to work.
On voting rights, I know you guys are going to take up the John Lewis voting rights bill. Senator Klobuchar said that's one way forward. She thinks that could be the way forward. But that's one met a very immediate end over in the Senate. What makes you think this will be any different in terms of if you can get it passed to get it over to the Senate? And have you been strategizing with your Senate colleagues on this?
Well, there has been a lot of informal conversations that have taken place with our Senate colleagues amongst various members of the House Democratic Caucus based on the relationships that they have. And of course, our leadership continues to talk with the Senate Democratic leadership and the members who have been most actively engaged on the voting rights issue, which include the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty, and of course, our House Majority Whip, Jim Clyburn, have been engaging with Senate Democrats as well. But it's important to understand what is at stake. Fundamental to our democracy is the right to vote. And Republicans have adopted voter suppression as a campaign tactic and strategy because they are bankrupt in terms of ideas to make life better for everyday Americans. That's why we are witnessing the voter suppression epidemic that is taking place across the country right now. And it's a shame. We were just, many of us, in San Diego a few days ago, where U.S. Navy ship John Lewis was christened. That's a tremendous recognition for an American hero. But John Lewis lost his life almost on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Beaten, battered, bloodied, and bruised. Almost lost his life fighting for voting rights over 55 years ago. And why are we back in this place? And so, yes, we're going to fight for voting rights with the fierce urgency of now. That is what the moment requires. And we will not give up. And we will prevail because we have no other option. Thank you, everyone.